We are a profitable and cash flow generating company.
Right.
We have been that from 2017, 2016 onwards. We generate our own cash. We don't need Echelon to run the company. Technically, we are a US company. It's very much a Sri Lankan-based company. 80% of the team is in Sri Lanka. 50% of the senior leadership team is in Sri Lanka. 50% of the remaining or even more are actually Sri Lankan origin, living primarily in the US now. I started something called the Lanka Software Foundation in Sri Lanka in 2003. The goal there was to show that you can be one of the creators of the technology of the world from this side of the world.
Right.
Sri Lanka was ahead of India at that time. Of course, now India is much larger. And we are not competing with India, we are competing with the world. When we started the company, our goal was to show that you could build a company out of Sri Lanka.
Hi, you're with Echelon. Now, as far as tech exits go, WSO2's recent announcement of its impending acquisition by EQT, one of the largest private equity firms in the world, is the stuff of dreams. In the studio with us is Sanjiva Weerawarana, the founder and chief executive of WSO2. Sanjiva Weerawarana, great to have you here on Echelon. We've had a big announcement, right? For one thing, WSO2 has always had great partners funding you. I think your last round was Goldman Sachs, right?
Yeah.
And now one of the biggest private equity firms in the world is going to acquire you. I think the deal is not done yet, but it's going to happen right now. Now, you are both tied in a partnership where you neither can pull out, right? Yeah, the partner is EQT. What does this mean for the company?
First of all, thank you very much for hosting me. So what it means is fundamentally there's an ownership change. Earlier, the company was owned by a set of shareholders, including employees. And now there's somebody who is coming in buying all the shares. So that's at the highest level, that's what it means.
But from an employee or customer point of view, they could all be wondering, what does this mean in a very practical sense? What does it mean for the product? What does it mean for career and all that? What about that?
Yeah, so I think that's the first thing that everybody asking. What does it mean for my job, for the employees, right? So it doesn't mean anything at all for the job other than that these guys are buying the company with the intention of growing the company. They're not buying the company to try to shrink it or try to curtail it or anything. They want to invest into growing the company from the size we are in to being 4 or 5 times our current size. So from a job perspective, it's very good. It basically means you're in a growing company.
Sure.
From a customer perspective, customers always wonder when a private equity firm buys, a typical model for private equity firms is optimize costs and maximize the price so that you basically leverage and just generate money. EQT has a slightly different orientation if you look at what they've done. And they are not trying to come and just say, okay, let's just increase the price by 50% to all the customers. So we have made that very clear to customers. We are not doing that. We're going to continue to build products and we're going to continue to give away all our products free because all our products are open source. So none of that is changing. We're just going to go capture more market share and become a bigger company.
Sure. They're going to purchase the company. What does it mean for, you need cash to run the company.
Yeah.
In previous rounds, new shareholders have invested in the company,
injected.
brought cash into the company and not necessarily purchased any shares. How does that equation change?
So we are a profitable and cash flow generating company.
Right.
We have been that from 2017, 2016 onwards.
Sure.
Except for 1 year in 2022 when we invested a lot to grow, but then the Ukraine war broke out, inflation started in the world. So it was a bit of an adjustment period for us. Right? So we generate our own cash. We don't need injection to run the company.
Right.
We generate enough money to grow the company as well. But we also need to have cash for M&A to buy other companies. Because in the tech world, typically when you get to 100 million or so, you start adding additional stuff. And then if you start something new by yourself, you're always starting at zero. And it usually takes 2-3 years for any company to generate revenue in any level in software world. So by buying a company that's already has some amount of revenue, you can fast track that process.
So you refer to that $100 million number, that's $100 million annual revenue.
Annual recurring revenue, yeah.
You're referring to. Does this mean like WSO2 is about to cross a threshold? Are things going to be different from what it was in the past in that sense?
No, I'm the CEO and I'm continuing to be the CEO. We expect to cross 100 million threshold this year. We're almost there, just a little bit more to go, but we'll get that done this year. And then we keep running the business. So those thresholds are a sort of important milestones that you meet along the way. But if you're on a long-term journey for something, then these don't change your trajectory just because you cross a threshold.
Right. Sanjiva, you're founder and CEO, right? So a lot of weight on this decision would have relied on your judgment about your vision for the company, what's good for the company, right? How did you rationalize potential sale to EQT in this case?
Yeah. If you look at WSO's journey from the start, fundraising was always very, very difficult. And there were really several reasons for it. One is the company...
Hold on, you just raised money from Goldman Sachs, right? The last round, it sounded like an unconventional route to go, but why do you say it was difficult?
Because the company is based in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
Right? That's one big one.
Right.
People don't like a tech company based in this side of the world.
Right.
Because there aren't any companies based in this side of the world. So they're not used to it, right? Especially going back to 2005, there was nothing. There were service companies out of India, but not product companies. So that was one of the biggest challenges. Second thing was, even when a company is in this side of the world, the CEO and the leadership team is in the US. And I was asked multiple times by multiple potential investors, when are you moving back to the US? And my answer would be, I'm not moving back to the US. Then that was like, okay, well then we're not going to invest because we like to have the CEO here. Right? So the other part was our business model was around open source. We took a position from the day one saying open source is the right way to build software, is the right way to distribute software, it's the right ways to serve the world. And so I wasn't budging on that. And if you look at all our competitors, many of them who started with an open source angle, over time became less open source. There's various variations you can do on open source like OpenCore, and they've done all of these things. We just flat out refused. So fundraising was always difficult for us. And also as a result, the shareholders, have some concerns, right, when you needed to raise money. So we wanted to find someone who were willing to bet on the company for a longer term agenda. So EQT has been very, very clear. Their goal is a 5-year roadmap, right? So they have a 5-year plan. They're going to work out with us, and then we execute to that plan. So that plan obviously has to grow the company significantly. They want to grow it 4-5x from where we are in the next 5 years, and that'll create corresponding value. And then there'll be a next step for the company. I started WSO always with the intention of making it a company that's going to last forever. We had multiple opportunities to sell the company. I refused. And it was war at various times to keep it going.
Right.
But so this is a great opportunity for us because it opens the door for us to say, okay, let's build the company to a level where we can become an institution.
So as from what you're saying, as CEO, you always had these two nagging things, right? One, your insistence on being based or keeping the leadership team based out of Sri Lanka, although you are a US incorporated company.
Yes.
Right? But the leadership team is based in Sri Lanka. That's a choice.
Yeah.
The second one was... Okay.
So let me just correct you a little bit. Leadership team is now global.
Sure.
Majority of them are of Sri Lankan origin, but our company, sort of ethos company, even though technically we are a US company, is very much a Sri Lankan based company.
What percentage of your team?
80% of the team is in Sri Lanka, right? Even the leadership team, maybe about 50% of the senior leadership team is in Sri Lanka. 50% of the remaining or even more are actually Sri Lankan origin, living primarily in the US now.
Right. So these were the two things that you had to sort of navigate, right? Your decision to be primarily based out of Sri Lanka and your decision to do open source in the way that you thought was fit, right? When you look back at the choices you made over 18 years, do you feel vindicated?
Good question. So one of the reasons, you have to go back to why this company was formed, right? So I'm a technical guy. I was a computer science researcher at IBM Research. I can still write code. I don't write code as a job anymore. But so I started the company not with the intention of saying, okay, there's an opportunity to make some money. Let's go make some money.
Right.
That's never been my purpose.
Sure.
Right? Obviously, when you start a company and you take people's investment and you give people options, the expectation is that there will be some money made. Otherwise, then it's just a job, right? Without that. But that was never the only goal for the company. One of the other goals was to prove that you could actually build a company from this side of the world. That was one of the defining purposes of WSO to say, look,
Right.
open source. I started something called the Lanka Software Foundation in Sri Lanka in 2003. The goal there was to show that you can be one of the creators of the technology of the world from this side of the world.
Right.
Sri Lanka was ahead of India at that time in how many people were actually creating open source software. Of course, now India is much larger, and you can never compete with India on anything which is based on number of anything. Simply volume game, we're going to lose, right? It's got to be some other angle. And we're not competing with India, we're competing with the world. So when we started the company, our goal was to show that you could build a company out of Sri Lanka. And LSF's work was started to that, and then WSO2 was started to show that that was possible. So the idea of saying, okay, let's give up on open source, give up on being based here, to me was never an option, right? But of course, that cost the company a lot in many ways. Fundraising would have been 100 times easier. And all of our competitors who started around the same time, if you look at those companies, they grew faster, they got higher valuations. So they got more return for the shareholders because they were able to do this sort of the normal enterprise software company game in the US, which we couldn't do. So pros and cons. But personally, I set out to do this and I'm not, it was not an option.
Were your stakeholders always perfectly aligned? As a leader, I mean, you possibly are spending already a lot of time trying to align stakeholders to a vision. Right?
Yeah.
Was that journey easy?
No, it was never easy. If you go back to the original angel investment, we raised $625,000. They came from angel investors. One was a guy called James Clark, who was a guy I knew. He was a wealthy person who could invest like that. He was a technical guy, and he invested in WSO2 because he thought that the technical direction was interesting, and he knew me a little bit. He thought that I would really work hard at making it work. And he knew we were not like technical people, but so he invested some money. And then my co-founder, Paul Fremantle, his father invested some money. And then we had a few other people that put in a little bit of money, right? So that was based on it's angel investment. Basically, they trust us, not the idea or the company. In 2006, when we tried to raise money, I talked to maybe 50 VC firms in the Valley, right? All of them said no, except for one, right? Intel Capital. And the reason they said yes is because the guy who I met, who I was introduced to by an open source connection, was an Indian origin person, Pradeep Tagari, and he was looking for a company in this side of the world to actually build an enterprise technology company, right? So it was luck. If he hadn't been around, we wouldn't have been able to raise money. So fundraising was very, very difficult. So stakeholders, so the good part is because Pradeep and Intel invested in a company in Sri Lanka, they were not looking to say, okay, let's move it to the US, right? So if you look at our investment history, it's a little bit odd because our investors were Intel Capital, then a company called Quest Software, which is what became our primary shareholder later called Toba, and then Cisco, and then a company called Pacific Controls, and right? And it was much later that Goldman did the investment. So these were not financial investors. They were all corporate investment teams. So some slight difference there as well, because then their angle is not purely how do I multiply this investment. They had a strategic interest in the company in some fashion.
Sure. I'm just doing the math in my head. 625,000 you raised, so you had a maybe, I don't know what the valuation was there, but
1.5 million valuation.
1.5.
And you know how the valuation was computed? We had 3 co-founders,
right?
$500,000 a piece. That's it.
Okay.
It's made up numbers.
Sure.
Because there's no way to value a company. How do you know? You got a bunch of nonsense-looking slides and a spreadsheet and no code.
Then you took this $600,000 in on top of that, right? You are kind of exiting at $600 million plus, right? Put this into context.
Yeah. So the angel investors are getting 50 times their investment.
Okay.
Right?
In
Basically.
18 years.
Yeah. A little bit more than 50, maybe 60 or so. But pretty decent. I mean, it's not great. It's not for tech investments, there has been people who have gotten 1000x. But it's a pretty good investment for them.
I mean, company could have gone bust like most.
Of course, most companies go bust. Most tech companies go bust,
right?
right?
You tend to lose that insight,
so
right?
Didn't go bust and returning 50, 60 times is a pretty decent return.
Right. Are you happy with how things have turned out? Not financially. Obviously, this isn't the number one metric that you seem to be chasing, Sanjiva, but your co-founders, your investors, your employees would weigh that.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't think they have the privilege that you have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So am I happy in terms of like What I'm most happy about is the fact that we have a 5-year plan.
Right.
It gives us 5 clean years. We haven't had that luxury for a very long time, basically ever. Simply because, for the first 15 years, we were losing money. First, maybe like 13 years or so, right? So that means we had to rely on raising money.
Sure.
And that meant like you don't know whether you're going to get this next thing going, right? So that was one challenge. Then the last 5 years or so, we've had, investors who were not so sure what they wanted to achieve. Right? They were not sure whether they want to, because our plan was to IPO the company. That was always the plan.
Yes,
right?
You said that.
But then they were, market conditions in the US market, global markets have evolved, right? It's not suitable for any kind of IPO right now. And second, we are not at the market when, 10 years ago or 5 years ago, even $100 million company could IPO. One of our competitors, Apigee, IPO'd when they were $40 million in revenue, right? And they were losing $45 million at the time. And they were still able to IPO, and they got like a $700 million valuation at the time. Now, a $100 million company, which is profitable like us, is still too small to IPO in the US markets.
Oh, okay.
So now it will be 200 plus. And either, growing very fast or growing and profitable, right? We are growing and profitable. We are not growing very fast, we're growing and profitable.
So your valuation currently is 6 times
roughly,
revenue. Roughly 6 times revenue. Yeah. Is that within the range of stuff that's happening in this area of
in today's market? Yes, it's pretty good. It's a very good valuation. It's a reasonable valuation.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. It's not an outlandish valuation. There are anywhere from 3 to about 20x possible. 20x is if you're in a very, very hot topic and, hot founders and all this kind of stuff.
Okay. How does EQT create the kind of value that you think can be created from WSO2 in 5 years? Like, given your track record, which is quite brilliant, right? $600 million company created mostly out of Sri Lanka is a unheard of thing.
Yeah,
here.
it is unheard of in Sri Lanka because we are not going down the right path in many ways. But it's not from a tech industry perspective, it's an okay outcome. It is, to be realistic, it is not a off the charts great outcome, right? I think there are many aspects to this. In my view, the first one is the fact that we are working on a 5-year plan, right? We are working together on a 5-year plan, which will have components of what are the growth we're trying to hit, what are the M&A kind of things we're going to do, what are the business lines we're going to execute, how we're going to execute, and so forth. They also have because they've run, they're kind of an unusual company, actually. They're a Swedish private equity firm. They started by a family wealth fund. And it's kind of like and it's a public company. Right. EQT is a public company in Sweden. You can buy shares in EQT.
Right.
And their investors are quite a bit of public investment funds, pension funds kind of companies. So they see themselves as shepherd of the company for a 5-year period, right? So they also have a strong management model they've developed over the years on how to grow a company, how to create value in a company they buy. So we look forward to working with them on adopting that and kind of engaging how we want to scale. And obviously from an equity raising point of view, they have capital. If we need to raise equity to buy something significant, we have a partner who can do it, right? Which is a luxury we haven't had for a long time. So I think overall, from a company perspective, this is very good in terms of being able to grow the business to being something that can become an institution over the next many, many years.
Do you think your employees will also be happier now because they have an exit? I mean, you can own stock in the company, but if you can't exit...
Yeah. If it's just theoretical paper, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think we've had, twice in the history where we did a buyback of some kind, where we gave people a chance to sell their shares, right? And kind of get something, get some return. So people had understood these stock options actually had some value because it's not very common, especially in Sri Lanka.
Right.
So people don't really understand what a stock option means. So there was some understanding of that. But certainly I think, having a full liquidity event where everybody, gets a meaningful amount of money or a lot of people get a very good amount of money is a very unusual outcome here in Sri Lanka. So I think that's good. But, again, we see it as a step along the way. I don't see it as anything else because we're not done. As a tech company, one of the things with tech companies, we're never done. Whatever technology we have now, in 5 years is going to be changing. Today's rage is AI. What's the rage going to be in 5 years? It could still be AI. It may be something else. We don't know, right? So you have to stay on top of things and constantly evolve, constantly keep fighting upward.
So as CEO, again, you have to think about this stuff, right? So AI is the rage. I mean, we've seen how AI has changed every day for us in the last 1 or 2 years,
Yes.
right? Really 1 year, right? The AI has changed every day. There's quantum computing. There's a bunch of other stuff that promise remarkable acceleration, right? How well do you think WSO2 is positioned given your business model?
Very well. So we follow all these, all the technical evolution, not just AI, various kinds of computer science evolution, quantum computing. We just released quantum safe security for several of our products. So we are investing into understanding quantum and what it means. Every part, if you are going to be a serious technology company, you got to know every bit of technology that's going on. And you got to understand what it means for power when fusion power comes along in 10 years. You got to understand, AI to space technology, what having SpaceX on top, what being able to have servers in the sky, what that's going to mean. So you have to really understand the whole picture because the customer base will want to adopt those things. There's been this thing called edge computing that's been around for a long time, but we are close and close to the point where we'll have a bunch of servers just 50 kilometers up in the sky, not in space, but where Starlink is running. Right? That kind of the low Earth orbit kind of things, or 80 kilometers, I can't remember how high they are, not very high, basically, right? Because it's now within reach of high performance networking. What does that mean for, when you access your enterprise application or your web application, whatever the thing you're using, your mobile app, where it's talking back to could be something sitting up in a cloud somewhere, literally in a cloud. And then how do you deploy software for that? How do you update that? How do you maintain that? That's the stuff we do.
Why couldn't Sri Lanka scale this, you think, right? I mean, you're talking about making a company relevant in a very particular sense, building product, making it relevant for a future that is edge computing, AI, and all that, right? Sri Lanka seems to have lost its way in the time that you founded WSO2.
Yes, to some extent. I've been fighting with all the IT associations in Sri Lanka. They love me, so I will continue to increase their love for me by this conversation. I think we as a country have realized that there is a good amount of profit you can make by selling people. I consider, they're going to get really pissed off with me. It's intellectual slavery. Somebody else tells you what to do and you sit here and do it for a lesser price. And it's great. It's a great job. It's something we should do. But we sit next to India, which has 100 times our number of people to do that kind of work. So we have done well. Virtusa as a company has done well. In fact, Virtusa is owned by EQT, was bought by the same private equity firm and taken private, right? So they are going to be a sister company for us and we'll be working with them. Also, IFS is owned mostly by EQT. So it's kind of interesting that EQT actually has a strong footprint in Sri Lanka. Out of all places. Yeah. And they have such a strong, because they are two of the largest companies in Sri Lanka in tech-wise, right? What I see is that we focused, unfortunately, on promoting policies and approaches focused on service companies. If you look at the numbers we talk about in Sri Lanka for IT sector, it's about revenue. The value of WSO2 is far exceeding revenue. In fact, in a good technology product company, the value is somewhere between 5 to 20x revenue. In a services company, it's between 0.5 to 2x. Virtusa was bought for 1.5 times revenue. Their revenue was $1.3 billion. They bought for $2 billion, right? That's the reality of the business model. In software, loss-making companies are okay. In service companies, you don't have that. In fact, and a lot of our system doesn't understand that. Along the way, somewhere, I was desperate to get a Sri Lankan shareholder for WSO2. So there would be more return coming to Sri Lanka. I'm not going to name them, but we pitched to various people, various corporates. The one conversation starts off with, how much profit did you make? They're like, well, we're not making profit, we're losing money. They're like, oh, no, then we can't invest. Right? So they don't understand. So, and the influence on the government has always been, we need more people. When we started Lanka Software Foundation, the main thesis was, you don't need more people to compete in the world.
Right. Let me challenge you, Sanjiva. Are you being kind of intellectually arrogant here? Because, you are not a normal kind of
Yes.
tech leader
Yes.
in Sri Lanka. So what's the pitch then? You want people to dream bigger, think bigger?
Absolutely. The problem is, we have all these startup accelerators now, right? It's the fad of the day. There are maybe 10 of them here. The problem is, if take and people talk about Mark Zuckerberg as an example of why you don't need to finish university and go and start a company and win, right? But Zuckerberg didn't start Facebook based on sitting and thinking, what can I solve today, right? He got annoyed with his girlfriend, if you believe that story, social network movie, right? He got dumped by a girlfriend, and then he decided to make a website to say hot or not, right? And that's what eventually became Facebook. And of course, Facebook has evolved from that to being an incredible platform. The point is, the people who solve problems solve them because that problem bothers them. So what we need to create in Sri Lanka is that culture of saying, hey, if you have a problem you care about, come up with a solution, pitch it to people who can help you with that, and then go after it. You don't solve this by thinking about random things and saying, somebody sitting on a coffee shop saying, well, what can I make, right? And the other thing we have to accept is that given the current economic status of the country, and I'm not referring to what happened, in 22 or whatever, right? In just overall status of the country and the size of the country, we can't make a serious software company that is selling only to Sri Lanka. We have to think of a global market. Now, so your point was, okay, is it intellectual arrogance because I have had that exposure, I worked in IBM, blah, blah, right? To some extent, yes. But then there are so many companies that have been formed all over the world by people who haven't had that exposure and that opportunity, but who experience something and say, I'm going to go build some software to do this, right? There are so many systems that have been developed by people. There are like one or two random people who write something amazing and it gets out all over the world. Sri Lanka has plenty of people with that kind of capacity. We have hired engineers from every university in Sri Lanka, pretty much every university. We don't bias towards, top this or top that university. And you give people the right environment and the right opportunity and the right challenge, people can do stuff. At one point, we had this language we had created for high performance event stream processing, right? Some area within the stuff we do. It was done by a university project, right? By a bunch of kids. I started WC2 based on stuff that we had done like that. So it is not that it cannot be done. It is just that people are not empowered in our system to go off and do those things.
Right. I'm asking you now to sort of think back also. What you have achieved in the last 18 years is off the charts by any measure in Sri Lanka. Very few companies have created that kind of shareholder value, right? Very few organizations have created that kind of opportunity for their stakeholders or for employees in particular, right? Give them challenges, like big challenges to solve, making them globally competitive immediately, right? Did you always vision this, that you could do this? On day one, did you think you could do this, or was it an evolution? As you got further down the road, you became more confident about your own capability to vision something?
If you want to land on the moon, you aim for the stars. But not in physics, obviously. If you want to go to the moon, you aim correctly to the moon, you'll miss it, right? But the point is, you got to aim high if you want to get somewhere. If you want to go to orbit, you got to think beyond that. Elon Musk is a great example, right? Think about going to Mars or whatever, right? But the point is, so the simple answer to your question is, even when we started LSF, Lanka Software Foundation, goal was to become a provider of platforms for the world. And my point that I went to various people and tried to convince them was, it is possible to do it with 5, 10, 20 engineers from Sri Lanka. You don't have to be in California. You don't have to work for IBM or Microsoft. Those are the two predominant companies. Today, you might call Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, blah, blah, right? It is possible to do that. And people don't do those things because people don't try to do those things. A good example is Israel. Okay, not a country that we want to take as a good example in terms of political things going on and the way they're dealing with these people. But technology-wise, a company of 10 million people has produced a country of 10 million people has produced an incredible amount of value for that country in tech creation and tech exits. Tens of billions of dollars worth of tech exits on average every year. Ireland, a country of 6 million people, amazing amount of tech exits. So Sri Lanka, a country of 20 million people, absolutely can do it. So yes, when we started, that was always the goal. I used to say, we want to become the number one middleware company in the world. That was our tagline. Internal tagline. If you go around to go into a customer and tell him, we're going to become the number one, they'll laugh you off the streets, right? In fact, before I started WSO2, I was doing a project in IBM called the Colombo Project. That one, when we pitched it to IBM's sort of technical leadership team, one of the guys came up to me and said, so you think you can start from the JVM, this is a Java virtual machine, which is where we start from, and build up an entire middleware stack to replace WebSphere and do it, with a small number of people? I was like, yeah, why not? Right? Sometimes you have to be foolish to not know how difficult it is to solve something. Right? So even when we started WSO2, I never knew how difficult it is to become number one middleware company in the world. Right? I was not a business guy. I still don't know how to read a balance sheet properly. Right? There are other people who know how to do that really well. So we're okay. But that stuff, so you have to have some degree of belief and sort of crazy belief to go off and do something. There was another line I have seen when Intel invested. I went to Intel's campus one day, and one of the Intel founders is Robert Noyce. I can't remember the exact wording. His line was something like, "Don't be encumbered by history. Go off and do something wonderful." Right? If you look at our history, you'll say, "Can't be done." Right? That's the general mindset we have for many things. Can't do it in Sri Lanka. Of course, why not? You can do it. You can do anything in Sri Lanka. It's an amazing place.
As CEO, you've got to have a clear handle on where technology is heading, because you got to make that call and say, we're going to invest in this. It looks like it's a pie in the sky right now, but this is what we're doing. But you also talked about your challenges, raising financing, and also selling product coming out of Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
How did you juggle, I think, these three big responsibilities that you just couldn't farm out to somebody?
Yeah, so I also had product work in WSO2, right? So I'm CEO. So we have Devakarandani, who's our chief revenue officer. He's the one who kind of runs all the business kind of stuff, right? And I support, but I don't get involved with day-to-day sales stuff at all. We are going to out-innovate ourselves before somebody else can innovate over us. Because in tech, the barrier to entry is very limited. The barrier to entry is very much some kid with a great idea who can program really well, who's got a laptop of some kind, has got an internet connection now. And you can bang out a bunch of code that 20 or 50 senior people can't figure out, can't come up with, and change the game on you. So one of the key things you have to do is to create an atmosphere where that kind of innovation is possible. Right? And if you are going to be, as a senior person, if you're going to be involved with driving innovation, you have to operate in that way as well. You got to be always aware that, look, everything you believe in, everything you think is right, could be wrong, right? And will be wrong. And so you must always be on top of evolving to the next level and the next level. So another thing, I believe in this principle of being dispassionately passionate, right? Dispassionately passionate. That means you're passionate about whatever the heck you're doing, but you're also dispassionate enough to step back and take a look at that and say, oh, that seems like full of bullshit. Let's back out of it, right? So, or another way of explaining it is strong opinions weakly held, right? You have strong opinions, but it's weakly held because if you give me some reason as to why I shouldn't have that opinion, I'm willing to change it. Otherwise, you become like this old fart, stuck in the mud kind of position, which is like, I took this position 10 years ago, I'm going to hang on to it, right? So people who work with me get frustrated a lot sometimes because I'll change my mind. So my answer for that is, look, if when presented with new information, you don't change your mind, you're being an idiot. You're not being a good leader, right? You should change your mind when there's new data that says the position you took is no longer correct.
Sanjiva, this has been a fascinating conversation. Anything you think you want to finally touch on that will help us round this off?
So I think my main thing is, look, Sri Lanka as a country has so many things going right for it. We've had many screw-ups and many bad decisions and bad whatever, but we have so much going for it. But one thing we are not doing on the tech side correctly is how we are building software for government. So I'd love to get the government to become like what Israel has done, basically, on the technology side, which is where basically the government should spin out or fund companies to create solutions for themselves. And that is how you become a country that is continuously producing things. Because we have a problem. Best solutions come when a problem is clear. One thing we do in almost every conversation is like, we step back and always ask, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Because if you can't clearly articulate what the problem you're trying to solve is, you have no idea why we're having a fight, right? It's like, sometimes you have a debate with somebody and after a while you can't remember what you're debating about. So you got to always know what is that problem. So if we start technology innovation in Sri Lanka by saying, okay, we need a solution for this problem. We need a solution for this problem. Let's start a company for that. Not just call a tender and give it to somebody, right? That's how we can create innovation out of Sri Lanka. Because we are in a unique place where we have our unique set of problems, and it's a great opportunity for us.
Sri Lanka is also so far behind in having citizen interfacing technology, right? That is obviously bad for citizens, but it is possibly an opportunity because this slate is still clear.
Yeah, I mean, it is behind, but in some areas it is not. You can get a passport in Sri Lanka in 24 hours. In the US, it takes 3 months, right? In the UK, I think it takes about 3 weeks. So, there are areas where we've done really well. But as a macro statement, what you said is correct. We are behind. And it is an opportunity. And also you have to remember, in any list of the world's rankings, we are maybe somewhere between 75 to 100 typically, right? In whatever the list you take. Some things we are ahead, very few we are behind that. So it means there are still another 100 countries behind us. So we have plenty of place to go and sell our stuff to. Even if we don't sell upward, we can sell downward, right? It's also soft power for the country. So tremendous opportunity.
On that note, Sanjiva Weerawarana, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much. It was fun.